take a moment to click the like button in the corner. It really does help us to grow. It allows us to show the platform the mysterious algorithm that appears to encompass all things, that we are growing and we are flourishing. Of course, as we are new, we need to let it know that we are an important place where fantastic discussions and amazing insights are happening. And this is where we require your assistance. You can press the subscribe and the follow button on your platform of choice. We're dropping fresh content each and every week throughout Season 1, and Season 2 is about to get underway, bringing powerful conversations and meaningful insights. Follow us on the platforms that you like the most. Your support does mean the world to us. Now, I think that's enough of me trying to sell what it is we're talking about. Let's go on with today's episode. All right, let's dive in.
Welcome to the Unearthly Bureau. My name's Martin Gibson. This is a podcast where we touch on hot topics and anomalous phenomena and the Fortean. We want to dive deep down rabbit holes and ask those unanswered questions. So come along and join us as we explore the correlation and crossover of phenomena between Fortean with our guest tonight, Marcus Lowth.
Well done.
The
Well done.
take wonder.
Yeah.
We like that. It's good stuff. It shows a bit of personality. We like it.
Welcome, Marcus. Welcome.
Thank you.
So
Thank you very
it's
much.
lovely to have you with us. And as we were just discussing before we started the recording, this is going to be the last of the series 1. And I think it's a perfect place for us to end, where we're going to be talking about this crossover. So, boys, if you're happy, shall I open up with the opening question?
Yeah.
You have a question. You have been prepared.
I have lots of questions.
You can see this paper.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, I printed it and then I use it the next week, so I don't waste. It's all good. Okay, so let's have a look at where we're going to start. So when we look at the spectrum of the Fortean and UFOs, hauntings, cryptids, psi, what do you think, Marcus, is the first crossover that jumps out to you and it's impossible to ignore?
This has kind of changed as I have researched. The first one that jumped out to me was the small sulfur-like aroma that they seem to show up in ghost encounters, Bigfoot encounters, UFOs. So that was the first thing. But the more research that I've done in this, I actually feel that it's more along the lines of emotion, and I think it's something that a lot of people overlook because these encounters are, by their nature, are scary, frightening. So you're going to feel that way. But I started picking up on things that people were saying that they had this overwhelming sense of fear or an overwhelming sense of euphoria. It's not always fright. And they spoke about how it was something as if something was taking over their emotions. It wasn't something that was coming from within them. It was something that was almost manipulating their emotions. And this shows up, obviously, in cases of alien abduction. It shows up bizarrely in Bigfoot encounters, not all the time. But, I was speaking to a Bigfoot researcher only the other day, and she was saying there's plenty of times when she's been out in the field and she suddenly just felt this overwhelming sense of fear and trepidation. And, it shows up again in poltergeist cases. It even shows up in some of the accounts from Ben McDo in Scotland, when people speak of an unknown force or an entity. And it makes them feel like they just have to get out of there, and they can't explain it. It's almost as if something's taken over their mind and their emotions. And so I kind of feel that emotions and emotional states play a big part in the paranormal. And I'm not saying that people are imagining things. I'm not saying that it's hallucinations. But I do think there's a kind of an interaction, if you like, between your emotional state and whatever the phenomena is. And I know some people say that, well, the phenomena is simply putting on different masks. It's presenting itself to you in different ways. And I think that's true to a degree. But I don't think that encompasses everything. I don't think that explains the phenomena in full. What I feel is that there is something like that does present itself in different ways. Now, people call them demons, which is a problematic word, I feel, because it evokes silliness, in the same way that portals do. But essentially, that's what we're dealing with, non-human entities, or whether they're energy-based or whatever. And so I think that, I feel that I think that emotions, and there's an interaction basically between the phenomena and your own emotional state. And what I also feel is that there's a mechanism that allows these different entities, different forces, different energies access. And again, there's an interaction with the person there. So really my research right now is focusing a lot on the emotional state of a person and how those emotions are manipulated and how there's an interaction through those emotional states.
So in the cases that you're talking about and you're reflecting on, are any of these where people have gone out with not the first impression and intention to go and look for something within the phenomena? Is it maybe something that's just happened to an unsuspecting member of the public that they say that they experience this, or are they primed where they're looking for something?
Could be a little bit of both. I mean, I know from my own experience, for example, when there was a lot of phenomena happening in the house, and again, this wasn't constant, but, you know, there was times when, for example, I would wake up on, not that I slept on the settee a lot, but, you know, like everyone, sometimes you drift off while you're watching telly or whatever. And I would wake up feeling absolutely terrified. For no reason, but absolutely terrified. And at that point, I wasn't really thinking of paranormal phenomena. It's only in retrospect that I've kind of looked back on things and thought, oh, that was strange. There did come a point when I really, you know, when I did kind of confront it, if you like, because it was hard not to. But yeah, there's lots of cases of people, particularly around hauntings, and even alien abduction, before they realise that they have whatever alien abductions might be, before they realise that has happened, they'll speak of things like just suddenly feeling scared, frightened, uneasy, all those things. So having said that, obviously it does happen to people that, like you say, can be primed. The Bigfoot researcher I was speaking about, now she's obviously gone out into the field plenty of times, so she's kind of alert to that kind of thing. But the emotional response, the overtaking of emotions is still very real. So both, really, essentially, Caroline.
So, I mean, Martin, I guess you would speak well to this, I'm thinking. So, from a psychotherapy perspective, what is the mindset of a person who's going into that space? So we're talking about priming. So if we are, I don't know, take customer X and Y, and they're going into a space and they want to go and experience Bigfoot, or they want to go and experience a UAP or a ghost in an experience, are they primed more likely to have that kind of experience because they're going there seeking it?
Probably are, yes. They probably are. But that doesn't really explain what Marcus is saying there. I think the first thing that sprung to mind when you were talking about that, Marcus, was the gap between the cerebellum that processes our responses and the intellectual part of the brain. So the cerebellum's working by it has a constant flow of information from our senses, and it's trying to find us a response, but we're not consciously aware of that response until after it's been triggered. So, but are you talking sort of minutes or half an hour or?
Oh, no. I mean, I would imagine nothing as dramatic as that. Seconds, you know, before you can come to. But it's still, I mean, again, it's interesting to know what you say there, because, you know, but some of the research, particularly now, because I'm kind of been almost influenced by people such as Anthony Peake, for example, you know, who's really big on this. And I feel, it's a bold statement, but I feel he's closer to anybody to actually get into the bottom of this right now as it stands. But, you know, I think it's almost as if there's like you said, a subconscious. Your subconscious has taken in this information. And like you say, it's struggling, your conscious mind is struggling to relay that to you. But we're just going quickly back to priming, and you were talking there about, you know, I completely agree with you. There's a theory that I'm really big on it, basically. It was put out by Ian McHugh, excuse me. And it's a psychic internet theory. And what he was saying is, if you get a UFO hotspot, for example, but it could be anything. It could be a haunted house, a Bigfoot, where Bigfoot sightings occur. People will gravitate towards those locations, as you say, because they want to experience it. Maybe they're researchers, maybe they're just adventure seekers. And so that subconscious desire in all these people's minds, he was saying it's almost like computers linked up on the internet subconsciously. And that's where I like the idea of the interaction, that although that subconscious energy manifests this thing, whether it's a UFO or a Bigfoot or whatever, it's imagined but real at the same time, which I know is a bit of a bizarre and crazy thing to say, but I mean, that's kind of what I feel that a lot of the paranormal experiences are. That they're not necessarily hallucinations, they're not just in your head, but I think we're talking about consciousness and subconscious ability. And I think that's why when you start researching this stuff, when I first started on this, I was into the paranormal, all aspects of it, but it was UFOs, which was the big thing for me. But then you start drifting out into like ghost encounters, poltergeist encounters. Now I'm finding myself increasingly researching and reading and speaking to people about such things as astral projection, even dreams, lucid dreaming, what dreams might be. I mean, a friend to me, it was just in idle chat, but he was saying, dreams could be where you kind of latch on to another version of yourself in another dimension, and your astral self kind of leaves your body while you're asleep. And it was just like kind of just like a chat over a beer, but it really kind of struck a chord in me. I think, well, maybe, because we all have recurring dreams. I have, dreams where I'm walking around my housing estate, for example. It's pretty much identical, but there's slight differences. It could be that the atmosphere is just different. Maybe it's darker. Certain things are in different places. And I know that dreams are just, what science will say, it's just like your brain sorting out the trash of the day. And I think for a lot of the time it is. But I also feel that there's a lot of aspects of dreams and dreaming that we don't fully understand. And I think, again, it's going to tie in to consciousness and things of like astral projection, astral self and things of that nature. So sorry I ended up going off on one there. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a minefield because I don't think we fully understand any of this stuff, not before we even bring in the paranormal aspects of it.
Maybe that's the key to everything, is understanding our own brains.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Because there's 86 billion neurons, we know sort of 10% of it, don't we?
That's what they say, yeah. So, I mean, and obviously that part of your brain is used for something. You start looking at things like junk DNA and what's that do? And that could also explain why some people have abilities, because they probably have access to parts of the brain that we don't, or most people don't. But you can also learn this stuff as well, so...
Yeah. It's like Caroline got me thinking today, actually. She was saying, why is it I experience this stuff? I can't remember what it was you were talking about, Caroline. But I sort of...
We went to a gig last night, and it's happened for the second time of going to the same place. I dismissed it the first time, but when I go to this one particular toilet in the break, the last time I heard somebody whispering and like constant chatter of whisper, as if somebody was washing their hands outside, talking to themselves, but they said my name. And I thought, well, are they just stood there talking to themselves and their own name's Caroline? So I dismissed it. Last night, I did exactly the same thing, went to the same toilet. And again, I heard the whispers and I thought, now, this is a coincidence. So I said to Martin, because I'm open and I look for this kind of stuff, does that make me more susceptible, like I'm a beacon? So if I go somewhere that has something that is anomalous or a crossover of something, does it look at me as being a shiny beacon and saying, I'll latch on to that? And when you walk in the door, the first thing that you do is give your name so that your name is on the tickets that you've bought. So would it know my name where I've said Caroline? But honest to God, it had me thinking, am I susceptible because of what we do? That we go somewhere. So that was the conversation that we had. So
it also got me thinking about neuroplasticity and how if we start to use certain neural paths, they become stronger, then they're easier to take in information, and do what we want them to do. And does that sort of mean that we experience more as we start to use the part of when we have an experience, we're using a certain part of the brain? Is that part of the brain becoming stronger as we use it? I mean, it would follow on, wouldn't it, from what we know about the brain?
Yeah.
So scientifically, we know full well that you can create new neural pathways. So if you've had an operation and you've cut that nerve through an operation, you can then create a new nerve path that goes to feed the limb or feed the area. The only time that that's damaged is if you've got something like multiple sclerosis or some kind of illness like that it breaks down the myelin sheath. But otherwise, you can recreate these pathways. So as Martin's saying, this plasticity, have I developed ability and Martin developed ability? Because it's not just me. The whole of our team have become very united, haven't we, Martin? Whereas before not all of us used to experience or hear things, but now most of us are on the same kind of path. That, you know, we're all thinking the same, and we're not out there Ouija boarding it with cat balls and K2s. We're really scientific and ASAP trained. So, you know, we're looking at the environmentals, we're looking at developmentation of a scientific procedure that's robust. Are we on the right path? Are we creating something that's helping us to understand what's going on? I don't know, but the whispering is there.
Were those neural pathways strong at one stage, and we've stopped using it for some reason?
Yeah, I know. I completely agree. I mean, I kind of asked this. I think it was Nick Kyle I was speaking to about this. And he was, you know, I was basically asked a question like you said, why do some people experience it? Why can some people see into the future? Why can some people, you know, channel spirit guides? You know, and he basically turned around and said to me, you know, can you run, Marcus? And I said, well, yeah, of course I can. He said, so how come you've not won a gold medal for England? I said, well, I'm not very good. And so I knew immediately what he was getting at, you know, that obviously some people are just kind of maybe born where it's, you know, where their brain is just mapped this way, they use the brain this way. But I certainly do think that the more you are looking into stuff, the more you're thinking about stuff, that kind of probably does, create, you know, more different electrical surges within the brain. And it happens a lot too, doesn't it? Like with, again, going back to cases of alien abduction, and we won't talk about what they may or may not be, everyone understands the concept. People often come back and say, well, since that happened to me, I feel more open-minded to the paranormal, or I have these bizarre dreams that are almost foretelling the future. This happens as well in poltergeist cases. So I do think, yes, the more that you are open to this, the more that you are talking about it, like anything else, the more you practice anything, the better you're going to become at it. So, and a good example of this is my wife, I think. You know, I mean, we've been together nearly 30 years. I wouldn't say she's into the paranormal. She finds parts of it interesting, but she's certainly not, you know, like myself. And she's, I wouldn't say dismissive, but she's certainly not as eager to look into things as I am. That's changed, though, over the last year or so. And I think a lot of that was sparked by, she saw a psychic medium, and I was immediately like, oh, well, they're all over your Facebook page, they're this is what they're doing, they're looking for tells. But he told us stuff which absolutely blew my mind, where there was just no way he could have known it, no way whatsoever. So I was kind of converted to that guy, at least, immediately. There was just, as I said, there was just no way on earth he could have known this stuff. But I feel partly because of that with Tracy, and partly because of the nature of what he was telling her, which was quite emotional, I think it kind of sparked something within her mind. I think it made her more open to this kind of thing. And I think that combined with my own, I hate the word belief, but my own suspicions about what this stuff is, I think it's kind of set her on that journey where now she's just kind of noticing things. I mean, me and Tracy also have this, and I suppose a lot of married couples do, but we have this bizarre thing where we're kind of in tune with each other. And it could be something really silly. Like I'll be at home thinking, well, what am I going to do for dinner tonight? And I think, oh, do you know what? It happened recently. We had some of those Rustler burgers in the fridge, nice and easy, bang them in microwave, you're done. And as I was thinking that, within a minute, maybe two, I had a message come through from Tracy to say, oh, should we have those Rustler burgers tonight for tea? And that kind of thing happens a lot. So are we in tune with each other because we are just been together a long time and we know each other think? I don't know if that explains that, to be honest. So again, I think it tells of your mind becoming more open, and you know, as quantum physics and quantum mechanics is showing increasingly every day almost that, you know, we really don't understand the nature of our reality. We really don't know what reality means, and we're kind of, as a collective, we're really only just starting to contemplate that, I feel, anyway.
So I find that me and the girlie in there, it's music actually is the one thing that connects us. I have a really broad interest in music, so my I could be jazz or lounge, or it could go to hard rock and metal and rap and, you know, whatever. And sometimes I'll just start off the top of my head randomly. I'll just start saying a few lyrics. She's like, I was just thinking about that. That's what I just said. That was what was running in my head at the time. So am I picking it up off her, or is she picking it up off me? But that must happen. It's probably once a week at least, where I'll just, like, you know, I'll just say a lyric that randomly just come to my head, like it's spontaneous for me to say it, and she's like, "Oh, that's what I was just thinking about." So that's pretty fun. And there is Caroline, what you were saying there is an interesting synchronicity. What happens is as you become more and more involved with the phenomena, more and more phenomena appears to focus in on you. So it's quite likely as you synchronize with the environment, I think it wants to synchronize with you. And I think people who are on the journey, for lack of a better term, whether they be spiritual or psychic, or those who are having even abduction experiences, those who are exploring the phenomenon, they also appear to have a synchronization with it, where they are expecting things are pleasant, things are almost expected to happen, and as they do, it's more things become in sync. You'll find you'll be at a place and there's also someone else there, and you suddenly have not only a connection with them, you'll both find you're there to help each other simultaneously. It's like you've been placed in the same place together, and you make interesting new space. And I find that very often.
Now, talk to me about synchronicities. The last year and a half has literally been one after the next, and there's a TV team, production team that we're working with, that a synchronicity came out. It was a pure conversation. We're doing this. Oh, really? We're also doing that. Well, when you finish doing it with that person, do you want to come and work with us? So that's how Martin and I got together there. And then Eamon Van Harris and I were having a chat on the phone, and it was synchronicity after synchronicity. Marcus, with you. So that's why we're going to be doing a project, which we can't talk about at the moment because we've both agreed an NDA, so we can't talk about it. But, there's little things like that that's going on. So I do believe in synchronicities, maybe never having done so before. But going back to how emotionally you connect with your partner, I don't have to have a conversation with Martin. He just walks into the room and I feel that he's perplexed. Before he's even said a word, he walks in, I take one look at him, and it's almost like an energy comes with him, and I just go, "What's up?" And he says, "No, nothing." And I go, "No, what's up?" And literally half an hour later, he'll tell me that he's worried about something.
We've spoken about mirror neurons on here before, haven't we? A special set of neurons that pick up on other people's emotions. So that's part of this, isn't it? If somebody fell off a push bike outside on the road, you could feel that pain, couldn't you, as they come crashing down. And yeah, it's interesting. A lot of primates are known to have these mirror neurons. They found it in chimpanzees when they're in mourning for another chimpanzee. Yeah. So maybe that's just the tip. Well, it is the tip of the iceberg, I expect.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That like you say, you pick up on people's energy, and I think I speak about this a lot. I think first of all, people talk about they use the word the paranormal. At some point, that's going to be explained by science. It'll just become normal. But like you said, picking up on people's energies. I mean, how many times, for example, do you wake up and you just feel, I don't know, it could be a sense of dread, it could be opposite, it could be, I feel good today. And then you get some news that really corresponds with what you're feeling. And people just dismiss that, the things like that. Or it could be, like you say, you're just thinking about a loved one, or, your mum, your dad, whatever, and then you get a call from them, "Oh, I was just thinking about you." And again, it's stuff that happens every single day to everybody around the world, but it's just dismissed as being, it's just one of those things. But I think these sort of things could lead us into understanding what we class as the paranormal, because I do think we use emotions more than we think. And, what is intuition? What is inspiration? I don't want to sound like a crazy philosopher, but, I don't think we really understand what those things are. I think mainstream science tells us what it thinks they are. And I'm not saying it's wrong by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's a lot more nuanced than just, it's just a feeling, it's just intuition. I don't know if that's good enough as an explanation. I think we need to know, well, why? And so that's what I think. Just one more thing to mention, Carolyn, you mentioned about being a beacon. And that is interesting, though. And I agree with that as well, because, again, how many poltergeist cases, ghost cases, for example, when you look at, legitimate, serious investigations, not ones that are on the telly with, well, I won't mention names, but, and they'll say that there's almost like a conduit. These spirits can almost pick up on who it can communicate with. It happened with myself, I believe, anyway, when my wife's mother died suddenly as well. They'd always had this long thing agreement that, if whoever died first would kind of try and come back and show the other that there was life after death. I'm sure this is replicated again around the world with people like this. And so, the day of the funeral, she did what they had agreed, lit a candle, left a little glass of Bailey's out. Nothing happened, though. I got up the next day, the candle had burnt out, but it had not been blown out. But I was in my chair reading, and as I invariably do, I dozed off. And I heard right before waking, and I could even feel the sound in my ear, boo, like that. And that's exactly the kind of thing that my wife's mother would have done. If she'd seen you in the supermarket, you're not spotted her, she'd come up to you and go, boo, and exactly like that. It's not something that I particularly picked up on at the time, but as soon as I heard it, I thought, that's Diane. And the reason I feel that it happened to me and not necessarily to Tracy is because at that time, I don't know that Tracy was open-minded enough for that, really. And I feel that Diane probably felt I can communicate with him. And I really genuinely do believe that was a real experience. Now, obviously, I know believe, I don't like the word believe, but that's all I can put on that. And so, yeah, I think they can tell who they can communicate with. And that's great when it's a spirit. When it's maybe something other than that, whatever it is, then that's obviously where danger can lie, and you lead to things like possession, which again is a word which is problematic, but it does happen. So, yeah, I completely agree that some people probably are beacons, Caroline.
Can I throw something in here and throw a nice little curveball around here? How this conversation actually began was about how there are people who appear to pick up on a sensation of euphoria, a sense of pleasure, a sense of warmth, also the sense of fear, and something. So you feel that is being projected by something. And something. I don't know how well you've read Whitley Strieber's books, or even, and I had to Google this in the back because I couldn't remember the lady's name. A lady called Matilda McElroy. She wrote a really interesting book back in the 1970s. So Matilda claimed that she was a nurse working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1947. And she claims in this book, it's probably written by a pseudonym, that she had Matilda McElroy. So in her diary of accounts is that she alleges rather, that she was brought in into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as a nurse to treat one of the beings who was crashed Roswell. Now, that being more problematic in one thing, but in her diary, it says that this being communicated to her through the mind. That's how it spoke to on a regular basis, and she talked about all the security things and the processes and protocols that she had to go through to be in that position. But the being was speaking to her and was telling her that the way that they would communicate actually is by pleasure and fear. So as part of the pleasure side of that, it is to induce a sense of euphoria within people, so they become docile, almost hypnotic. And that is how that they would manipulate you, or they'll put you into a state of almost a semi-trance in a kind of sense position where you would be susceptible or manipulatable. They can slip past you, they can disappear, they can not be detected, but also to put you in a state where you can be highly suggestible. And that is what she says the being was telling her about how they communicated to other people. But again, also the state of fear was to project because you feel so fearful, you actually don't progress any further. So because they are telepathic, if you perhaps have stumbled upon them, or if they are in a space, what they then do is they project fear, they project images of they could be the giant figures like demon-like things or faces, or a sense of fear, just so you don't go in there, not to see them. They just want to be avoided, so they'll project that almost like a dome of sphere of fear, so you never go into that space. So as such, they get avoided entirely. And Whitley Strieber, in his books, also mentions a very similar thing with his conversations too. I believe that being called herself Aria, It's a really interesting book, actually, by Matilda McKendrick. There was a podcast about it a few months ago I listened to, and he actually read the book out, so I was able to listen to it like an Audible book. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, just telepathy itself is another connecting element around the paranormal.
For sure.
I mean, it happens in alien abductions, again, in ghostings, and people speak about, like you say, they not so much speak about it as emotions, but they almost say it's not like they're hearing words as such. It's almost like just an understanding all of a sudden. I suppose it depends on who or what you're dealing with, in terms of what the emotional spot, what the desire is for the response, through manipulating emotions. It's also worth, not just in any abductions, but in paranormal ghost cases where people, as you say, will walk into a room and all of a sudden it's like they fast forwarded and they're somewhere else completely and they've blacked out. But they can't have blacked out. They must have got there somehow. So yeah, I do think manipulating emotions is whatever he's doing. I do think that is happening. It's also interesting to look at the work of Barry Fitzgerald. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's wrote the book The Influence, and he was talking about how literally there's like a whisper in the ear, and he was asking questions like how much of your decision making is down to yourself. He was like some hyperbolic examples, but serial killers, for example, he was saying that he highlighted our Peter Sutcliffe before he went on his sprees, and I'm not trying to put up excuses for serial killers here, you understand, but he was saying he worked in a graveyard in a cemetery for several years before, and he put over the suggestion that perhaps there were whispers in the ear. I mean, we hear it a lot in defences for these kind of things. I heard voices. So that could obviously just be, I need to get out of this somehow, so I need to come. But what if it isn't? And again, I'm not trying to excuse that type of behaviour by any stretch of the imagination. Ultimately, a person is responsible for their own actions. But it does come up a lot. So, yeah, if we're talking about entities manipulating emotions, and they can certainly influence a person and use those emotions to do it. So, yeah, I think it all kind of ties in, to be honest.
I'd love to share this story with you. So, for 21 years, I worked for a major national supermarket, right? Can't say which one, but they were owned by an American conglomerate, right, for a big period of time. So you might be able to guess which one this is. So in their New York store, they had, and they called it the telepathic advert machine. Okay, so you could stand on a big smiley face on the floor, a big Walmart smiley face on the floor, and while you were stood on there, you would hear adverts in your head. They were actually being projected to you via microwaves and were vibrating your ear at the back. So you literally were telepathically hearing an advert with nothing touching you. So you had to stand under this dome thing above your head to hear it. But now I was like, this tech is real. You can actually project voices into people's heads. And you often do hear exactly what you said there. People hear voices. And I've often wondered, are people hearing actual voices, or are people being manipulated to act in a certain way due to, a consistent, because you can imagine there are clandestine experiments on humans for the sheer sake of let's just see what happens. Could a person, therefore, be in a position where they are being manipulated to act in a certain way just for perhaps, clandestine experiments or just human experimentation, potentially? Not by government, but by, entities, private industry or whatever, just to see if it actually works. Could you influence a person by rapidly projecting messages into their head? So they are therefore assigned to be schizophrenic or whatever, and actually they generally are hearing messages that are suggestive and might keep them up all night. It might keep bothering them till eventually they crack psychologically.
Yeah, no, I mean, you don't want to go down the conspiracy road too much there, but like you say, there have been documents that have been leaked or, there was one to Muck Rock, which was sent in error, it seemed, and they were speaking about exactly that, sending technology, waves into a person's mind that bypasses the auditory system, but just appears within your mind. If we can understand that technology, though, that would also maybe lead us to understand, well, how is paranormal telepathy generated and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
I bought Martin a set of headphones a couple of years ago, which were quite progressive at the time, but are they called bone conductors?
Yeah,
and they don't actually play music in your ear. They play them to the back of the ear. So when you're running, it keeps your ear free to hear if there's cars or anything. But to put them up, you can't actually hear anything coming out, I'm aware of.
Wow, that's amazing. That really is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm completely unaware of them.
I was when we were speaking to Randy was it last week or the week before?
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
Marcus, I was explaining that I had a case several years ago of a guy who was hearing low frequency noise from a sand filter at a water plant, which obviously would be pretty annoying, but it was making him anxious. When he heard this noise, it was actually triggering his fight flight. And we worked on it for a long time, never really managed to sort of sort it out for him. But whilst I was researching to try and help him, I came across a theory that these low frequency noises, back in prehistoric times, would have signified danger, a dinosaur, or a
low rumble,
or a low rumble of a volcano about to erupt, and it would have triggered the fight flight in us, which is quite interesting, because that part of the brain still works in the same way now.
Yeah.
So how much of that are we picking up on? Is it low frequency that's causing these feelings of anxiety before an experience?
It could be. I mean, again, not went on a conspiracy theory, but there's been allegedly been experiments with, weapons of exactly that nature, that are sending out frequencies that, again, are bypassing the auditory system, but it's evoking feelings of panic or fright. It's interesting, though, like you say, that this goes back to essentially caveman times, and that could have been an earthquake, it could have been a volcano. But when you look at a lot of paranormal cases, whether it's crop circles, I was speaking to Karen Alexander recently. She was speaking about strange noises sometimes in and around crop circles when they're forming. Poltergeist activity, again, you get the strange low humming, UFOs. It's another one. I don't necessarily recall this on Bigfoot encounters, but I'm sure if you search hard enough, you will find some of that. So perhaps this low humming, this whatever it is, perhaps that is just like a precursor to what paranormal activity, whatever that paranormal activity might be. And so it could be that's registered in the back of our minds, in the reptilian part of the brain or whatever, that's almost like saying something's going to happen. And that goes back to just that thing, about like, just having a feeling that something bad's going to happen. Or it can be something really simple. You're walking down the street, you're just about to step out, and you stop. You don't know why you've stopped, and then a bus does zoom straight past you. And these things that I think people dismiss, there could be a lot more weight to them than I think a lot of people think. So, yeah, I mean, what that low humming is, who knows? But it shows up a lot. I mean, it shows up. There was a case, I can't remember the country, it might have been Puerto Rico. I'm positive, I think it was actually. And it was being reported all around the country, this low humming sounds, and as if it was coming from underground. And nobody actually got to the bottom of it, what it actually were. There were rumours abound. It's government buildings down there, or it's UFOs, but nobody actually got to the bottom of that. So, yeah, I think it's definitely something to that, for sure, yeah.
I think deep boring tunnels and stuff, that's often been cited.
Yeah, that was the insinuation. I mean, I know there's a lot of that in America around Dolce and things like that, where people say, but I mean, again, if there was something going on, it's a great cover to say, it's UFO, it's underground bases. We don't know what that humming actually is. There's been no proof of that, really. No. So it could be something completely different, but it does happen. People do report hearing it.
That brings me on nicely to, let's get us back on track again, talking about the crossover. So, how do you interpret the idea of liminal spaces, attics, basements, borderlands, crossroads, abandoned spaces, all these kind of things? How do you think they figure into these crossovers?
Again, I think it depends. I don't know if there's one rule fits all, but, I suppose things such as basements, people will say, well, there's something down there and things like that. So, it could be certainly possible that a spirit or an entity, in my experience, can become trapped within a certain environment. I mean, it's interesting to note that, somebody will buy a house, for example, everything's nice, hunky-dory, having a lovely time. Then they'll do some renovations and all manner of activity starts happening. It's almost as if that is like unleashed something. It maybe actually physically has in terms of, changing the structure of a building can change the activity. It can also work the other way, where you destroy a building and that activity will dissipate. But yeah, I just think it depends. I think it depends on how powerful the spirit is. If it's a spirit, if it's a non-human energy, then that can probably cross rooms and cross borders and go wherever it chooses. A lot of the time, spirits, and you all know this as well as I do, they're tied to certain locations because they don't quite know that they've passed on. They're kind of in like a limbo land, if you believe that research. And so it would make sense that they are, kind of retained to that environment. And then when you talk about residual hauntings, then obviously that kind of is probably within either the structure or the bedrock itself, and that will obviously remain where it is. So I think it's a case-to-case thing. I think some people, for example, it's not even the house, it's them. And it's not necessarily that the spirit is like following them. It can be, but it could, again, go back to that interaction with the consciousness. And perhaps whether somebody's super tired or they're emotional or they're angry. And that can be when maybe that energy can interact with them. I don't know how to explain that in a scientific way because I'm still kind of wrapping my head around it now. But yeah, I do feel I don't think there's one size fits all. I think every case is different and every spirit, every entity is different, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we've discussed this topic, Kristian, with Corinne Besant before when we were talking about like Jamaica Inn and how there's hauntings there that's not been reported before and new things that's come in and people say, well, hang on a minute, that's a new part of the building. How's that new part of the building got somebody from the old part of the building that's been recognised in room 4 before? I mean, there's activity in this house that was very specific that I had in my last house. And I wouldn't say my last house was haunted, but when my husband died, we agreed that he would do certain things to let me know that there was life after death. And it would be leave 5 pences or leave white feathers, or he affected the fire alarms. And I moved into this house, he'd never been here before. And I'd never had any kind of activity for a little while. But in the first month, I had all the renovations started. So all the windows were done, floorboards ripped up, all the wiring was replaced. And my son's friend came over to visit for a physio session. And we used to look after her in the respect. She was another daughter. So she'd come out and she'd do stuff with Ross and myself and my late husband. And she said, I really miss Daddy Steve. And I said, well, in the last house, he used to set the smoke alarms off, but he can't hear because I've ripped them out. And I laughed. And I said, unless he manipulates the smoke alarm with the battery in that I put together. And literally at that moment, it went off for 3 rings and stopped. And that was the way that it went off in the last house. So Charlotte was just like, oh, wow. Do you think that could be Steve? And the TV went off and on again. And I went, so since we've lived here, Martin's been here for coming up 8 years, I think. And I've been here for 10 and a half. The activity has been there almost the whole entire time of being here. But he's never been in this house. So how can we explain that unless if anybody dies, they do have free range to where they want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do think they do have free. Again, I think it depends on it. And I don't got the answers to this, I'll be honest, as to why this is, but I just think it depends, whether perhaps it's just down to what the spirit itself wants. It would make sense, for example, that, he would follow you there as a lookout. I was watching, I was saying a show, but it was an internet show, so it wasn't all for television and things like that. But they were saying that they had like something in their house, this family, and they ended up getting a psychic medium to cross it over. It wasn't that they were necessarily making them feel scared outside of it was something out of the norm, but when they got that spirit to cross over, all of a sudden all manner of things started happening, and it turned out when another psychic medium came in that the spirit was actually looking after the family. They were holding off all these other entities. And so obviously when he's gone, and that begs the question, if you do cross over, whatever that means, can you come back? Or once you're there, are you there for good? You know, or can you is it a question of a split of consciousness? So yeah, I just think if I had to put my money on an answer right now, I would say it just depends on the spirit, on the entity, as to whether they feel comfortable in a certain place. Sometimes that's the case. Maybe that's where their life ended. That's where they felt happiest. Or perhaps they do manifest wherever they wish. And I would imagine there needs to be a certain amount of energy for that. And that's why also, I suppose, when you do get bizarre activity and people say, well, you can't ignore it. The more you ignore it, the more it's going to happen because they're trying to communicate with you. But also people will say that the more intense the activity, the more other energies that are attracted to what's going on there. Perhaps as a thinning of the veil, I don't know. So, I don't necessarily think, I do think residual things are a thing, but I don't think ghosts are necessarily trapped to one location. I think they probably have more free will. And it sounds silly talking as of ghosts as if they are real, but I mean, essentially there is something, I think, beyond what we know, and there are energies, there are spirits, whatever they are, and I think they can manifest where they feel they need to manifest, basically.
I mean, I was going to ask, what if you flipped the narrative of ghosts and spirits of the dead with the idea, of course, we've been talking about the projection telepathically of, of things perhaps trying to hide, things trying to manipulate our emotions, things that could appear as other things. What if ghosts and hauntings, poltergeists, spirits are not that at all? What if they are in fact broken projections from a technology that's somehow in our environment?
Oh, you mean so what? Okay, let me just see if I understand your question. So you're saying are we talking human-made technology that's almost
maybe not human, but something that may be in our environment that we don't know, but something that masks itself occasionally. It's being seen, and occasionally either has to flood you with endorphins to hide or borrow you occasionally. Something that occasionally has to create fears for you to stay away from potentially its detection, and then occasionally it has to. Maybe you are connecting with this technology, this invisible Wi-Fi, whatever you want to call it, and then we are perhaps seeing glimpses of something that then has to hide as something people claim they see their family members, people claim they see their animals, but they may well just be expectations of the person who's seeing them. So you expect to see Grandma Lil or whatever, suddenly you see Grandma Lil in the corner. That's perhaps why we see monks in a house or whatever. Maybe it's just it's projecting what it thinks that you need to see for you to go away or you to be satiated. Is that potentially? That sounds a little technological in nature rather than spiritual. And that's perhaps why ghosts and hauntings and poltergeists are so almost like there appears to almost be a pattern, but doesn't make much sense. And I think people go, oh, there's a residual haunting. Oh, there's an occasional haunting. Oh, we see something, then we don't. These appear to be almost repeatable, but they're so inconsistent. And that's what the inconsistency, I think, is the X factor in that. I often think it might well be something else at play. And people don't generally consider that in the paranormal community. Maybe it's a bit one of those topics that we need to look back and try again, because for nearly 100 years, the paranormal community hasn't moved forward very much on this topic. Between hauntings, ghosts, poltergeists, etc., there's not really been a theory that sort of fits.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to what I was saying there, and I think both are right, essentially. I think, like we said, there's some people that do say that you're not seeing your Auntie Mabel, you're seeing something presenting itself as your Auntie Mabel, and that all paranormal phenomena can be explained through something wearing different masks. I can't remember if it was Keel or Valet who said that, they'll present things of an absurd nature to you on purpose to confuse. But I just think with that theory, there are too many variables. There are too many variables to explain it all. There are plenty of cases where people have interacted or they believe they've interacted with a loved one. And the argument is very compelling. So what I suspect is that there is an intelligence like that. Now, whether it's using a technology or just using something, like you say, spiritual. Who knows? If it's a technology, then we have to start thinking, well, where are they coming from? Are they based here? Are we talking about interdimensional? But yeah, so I do think they exist. You look at things of the jinn, that trickster element. So I do think that happens. I think that happens more than people think. And I think people should be very aware of that. It's one of the first things a paranormal investigator will kind of warn about. This might not be who you think it is. It could be trying to manipulate. It could be. But I also feel there are occasions when you are interacting with the person that it says it is. But that's what makes it such a minefield, because we haven't got an understanding of this. We don't really know, and we can never really know unless we get an understanding of what is happening. And I'll be honest, I suspect, a lot of this stuff's going to be almost like, for example, when you have near-death experiences, people who have them, they describe things that could tie into poltergeist activity, can tie into alien abduction activity, so it all connects. And I suspect that what a lot of this interaction, this ghost activity, paranormal activity, I think it's almost a glimpse of the other side. I think it's like a crashing of two existences, essentially. I think we'll all end up there at some point. But I mean, I digress. The short answer to your question is, yeah, sometimes I think it is that. It is a trickster. And other times it isn't. And it's up to each of us in the moment, I suppose, to decide what it is. And you hope you choose right, I suppose.
Oh, the one thing about the trickster element I really find compelling is the need for the trickster often to interact with a person and ask a question. And you find that from the Blue Men of the Minchin up in Shetland Islands, from the front of the Sphinx, with is it Muhammad al-Mahid back in the 1100s? Every time they've interacted with a trickster character, there's a cryptic question they have to almost ask, and I find that's a really odd, peculiar element to the trickster. It doesn't need to be satiated. It doesn't need to know that you are intelligent enough. So not that you're not smart enough, because the questions are often quite simple. But therefore, it needs to acknowledge that you are, sentient, perhaps.
It's interesting. I mean, the first thing I think of there when you were speaking about that, and again, I know this is a bit off-cuff and a bit silly to some people, is you look at Legends of Vampires that have to be invited into a property. But it's not just vampires. It shows up in Legends of Men in Black, Black-Eyed Children. Yes. All have to be invited inside. So perhaps this questioning that you're speaking about, it's just another part of that. It's almost as if there's some unknown set of rules that we all have to abide by, but they know the rules and we don't when you speak of things like that. But yeah, I get what you're saying. I think it shows up in other areas, particularly having to be invited into a property, into a place. So,
well, I like the idea that I spent some time within the spiritualist pagan community. The one thing I noticed, there's a lot of banishing spells. The idea that you are mentally interacting with the environment and placing essentially spiritual barriers around that other entities who might be in the environment cannot cross. And I wonder, is that an inverse of the same phenomena happening? So you're in your house, and you believe that is your house and your property, and thus nothing can come in. So whatever spiritual entity might well be floating around outside, it has to abide by the fact that you already mentally have a barrier at the door. So it has to ask you to come in, and thus you let it in. But the inverse would be, you've put a barrier up in the psychic space, in the mental space, to block it out. So it's almost like they are the inverse of the same thing. It is a placing of a barrier in the spirit realm, should we say, and they have to obey that rule. That I find is really intriguing.
Yeah, it could be. And you know the thing that you're thinking of there, that I'm thinking of, sorry, as you're speaking there, is I saw, and again, this is fiction, but you'll understand what I mean when I get to it. I saw a film, I think it was called The Shadow People, actually, and basically, towards the end of the film, it turns out the guy, he sees somebody receiving a placebo drug, and the chemist kind of explains why that works, and we all know what placebos are. But then he could see it twigged in his mind that the only people that were attacked by these things were people who believed in them. People who didn't, they were perfectly safe and fine. So I guess when you're speaking now about having psychic barriers and stuff, maybe that questioning is almost opening a person's mind so it can actually infiltrate it. If you don't believe in something, maybe, it cannot do that with you. And I was speaking with a UFO researcher about this, actually, and we were saying that, and again, this was just theories and speculation. People were saying perhaps the reason that governments and authorities around the world, if we're assuming these things are all connected, are so like there's no such thing as UFOs, no such thing as aliens, it's not happening, blah, 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 is so people don't believe it. And if people were suddenly open to this, then this stuff could go wild. People could be getting abducted all the time, have poltergeists in the house. So maybe it comes down to belief. And as you say, there's plenty of evidence as well, like local news for local consumption. If you go to South America, they'll speak about the same thing, but they'll call it something different. They'll describe it differently, but essentially it's the same. It could be a Bigfoot, it could be a cryptid. But so, yeah, I think there could be something to that there maybe a belief in something plays a major part. And that goes back to consciousness, subconscious, and things like that. The
consciousness element is really, really intriguing in that, isn't it? You have to almost allow the belief to happen for it to allow it to happen. Just talking about the idea of other aspects. In folklore, of course, you've got the I don't believe in fairies, from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. That is the fact that you believe in fairies allows them to exist. And when you don't believe in them, they die.
Yeah, I mean, it could be exactly that. As I say, and the only way we'll get to the bottom of that is just do more research. But I do think there's that sort of theory or suggestion holds more water than people think. That it could really be down to not personal belief, just open. It goes back to what we said at the start of the show: opening your mind to this stuff, whether you kind of realise you're opening your mind to it or not. I guess a good example would be like Ouija boards. People say, don't mess with it. Even though they were sold as toys, back in the 60s and 70s. But, people say you shouldn't mess with that kind of stuff. And if you do, you should close things down. And perhaps you are bringing over a spirit that then stays with you. But perhaps you're just opening your mind to it. And once your mind's open, once you stretch your mind, you can't put it back to the way it was. So I don't know. But, yeah, I think there's a lot of weight to what you're saying there, Kristian.
Interestingly, something just clicked in my mind there, that when the cerebellum is looking for a response, that's plausible and possible. So I guess if you don't believe it, then you can't have the response, can you?
Yeah, again, it makes sense. I mean, these are the kind of things that we should be looking at, I think.
It clicked with me when we were talking about the belief system from all different parts of the world seeming to feed into the same kind of belief system. Martin, you wrote an article for Haunted magazine not long ago, didn't you? And explain your research, how all these different parts of the world came up with the same kind of concepts.
Yeah, I mean, it happens an awful lot, I think. Marcus probably knows more about it, but I was basically, Caroline said, write an article. I thought, right, I'll write about something that I enjoy. So the blues, okay, so Crossroads. And I started researching Crossroads, and Crossroads meant the same thing on several continents at the same time that didn't have any communication between them. They were sacred places on separate continents. And then we were talking, what were we talking about the other day? That was with Kate, wasn't it? And we were talking about the Mexican little people. I can't remember what they were called now. She was talking about, what was it she was actually talking about?
Acknowledging them and not being polite to them, saying they had a task to do. Was that the thing? Gnomes. So the Mexicans have the same thing over there. Exactly what she was describing. The big black eyes, and the way they looked, the way they sort of whistled and sang at the same time, that type of thing is exactly the same in Mexico as it is here, as it is in Ireland, as it is, in all those other places.
So again,
I mean, nowadays, obviously, communication has changed due to social media and stuff, but back in the really early days, and you're talking back to Greek times, you had your underworld god Hecates, and you had all of the kind of information, and it kind of stemmed from there with the crossroads and liminal spaces, and the folklore kind of originated. So back then, how did that information tally across different continents?
Well, I mean, again, obviously I don't know, but I mean, I would say there's a few suggestions, really. I mean, first of all, I guess a more rational explanation in that there was simply more travel. Societies that we think were not in contact with each other might have been. The ancient Egyptians might have gone to the Americas, for example. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that they got as far as Scotland. There's certainly connections there. However, if we're speaking about consciousness, then, I mean, I was speaking to somebody only last night, Steve, actually, and we were saying about how humanity, we were talking about reincarnation, past lives and things like that. We could just be expressions of a global consciousness. And if that's the case, then we will be susceptible and open to the same consciousness, energy around the world, regardless of where we are. And this kind of plays out in modern times too. I mean, there's been a lot of cases, haven't there, where scientists have submitted papers, for example, on research of no communication between the other side of the world, and yet they've essentially written the same paper with the same theories. And so is that just coincidence? Could be. Or are they getting what we would call inspiration from the same consciousness? So that's why I think there's those two possibilities. Either we're looking at a global civilization, or we're maybe the remnants of that, or I would say that it's kind of more to do with a consciousness from the other side, where if you want to say that is able to interact with humanity. If that's the case, though, then that leaves us to say, well, why are they doing that? What's the agenda? What do they want to get out of this? Are they just toying with us for their own amusement? That seems a little far-fetched to me, as something on this scale. So it makes you think, and I suppose you've got to be careful, because then you're drifting into creationism and things like that. But who's behind this consciousness? Is there an agenda? Why are they getting humans and humanity to act in certain ways? But that could just go back to the influence. But I think I favour the latter explanation, that it's probably consciousness revealing itself to humanity all over the world, and it'll do so, like Kristian was saying, in a way that group or civilization will interact with it.
So I can see that Chris is probably pulling something up for us to listen to, but just before we go down that route, can you give us an example of a historical case that can best illustrate a crossover of phenomena, and why do you think it's been overlooked?
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm tempted to start. Okay, yeah, I can actually. I think it was from the research files of Tony Dodd, I believe, and he was relaying an investigation, and it was with a couple, with a child, and they were experiencing what they thought were hauntings. Essentially, they'd see robed figures in the bedroom. They'd hear strange sounds. The husband particularly would hear knocks on the door, and it sent him into a panic, and they couldn't understand why that was. It was like a repressed memory. And this followed them around. They moved several times, and this happened in the 90s. And and again, I know hypnotic regression, some people look on it as, we shouldn't be doing that. But through hypnotic regression, they eventually uncovered memories of being abducted by aliens. And so, we've got poltergeist activity, we've got alien abductions and UFO sightings, and then you've got robed figures, which is almost like a ghost. But I mean, robed figures shows up so many times in alien abduction cases. And so I think that's a case that kind of shows all of those aspects of the paranormal. There's another one as well, as a lady in Sheffield, and a similar thing. She heard a guy speak on the radio. It might have been Timothy Good, it might have even been Tony Dodd again. And he was talking about alien abductions, and that suddenly triggered memories in her mind. She contacted him again through regression. She recalled multiple cases of alien abduction, but she also recalled poltergeist activity in the house, which she dismissed. She didn't recall it through regression. She recalled that naturally. And that case also looked at. She said she was, during one abduction, she was told information about the pyramids, and that she could see ancient Egyptian type hieroglyphs on the room she was in. And so that then brings in like your ancient mystery side of things, and like this agenda that's been with humanity. And I'm not saying aliens built the pyramids or anything like that, because I would say aliens probably aren't aliens at all. They're probably just a non-human intelligence. So yeah, I think the best place to start with this really would be with alien abduction cases. I think quite a lot of them, you don't have to pick one. I think quite a lot of them are overlooked because you'll focus on the alien abductions, and this other activity that's happened before, I just think that's kind of let go and people don't pick up on it. Another example, okay, I was on an internet forum probably about 2 or 3 years ago now, and I was looking for paranormal accounts and just like see if anyone would, want to share more with me. And there was a lady on there, and she was saying that it was to do with ghosts, this. And she was saying that she would often wake up in different rooms in a house. She would find her clothes discarded bizarrely as well in different, not just like hung up, but thrown in a room. She also said that she would find her feet were dirty a lot, like, covered with muck and dust and things like that. And she put that down to just being outside a lot. But then she said that when she was having these experiences, she would often dream of owls looking in at her through her bedroom window, particularly as she was coming out of sleep. And that immediately made me think, well, I want to speak to her. So I messaged her, we went back and forth a bit. And she was happy to speak. But then when I said, what I'm kind of thinking is this could maybe be alien abduction. Because all the things you're describing to me, I know they're associated with ghosts and poltergeists, but they also come up in alien abduction cases. And she completely shut down at that point. She was happy to contemplate ghosts, but as soon as aliens came into the picture, she was like, no, I don't want to speak anymore. And we were polite with it, but I could tell I'd lost her, So I think it happens. I don't think you need to highlight one. I think it happens more than people think. I mean, if you go back to the Blue Book files, for example, which I know were kind of a farce, really, but a lot of those people that were reporting UFOs were also reporting Bigfoot encounters or strange creatures outside that weren't necessarily alien-like. So I think a lot of it's overlooked. I think people like Keel and Ballet were quick on the ball on this, and I think they were basically saying right off the bat, that this stuff is connected. But then I think as the abduction encounters became rife in the 70s and 80s, that stuff kind of fell by the wayside and people concentrated purely on the alien abductions as if that was a phenomenon in its own right. And I don't think it is. I think it's part of something else.
Yeah, I brought some notes up in the background. So the Betty and Bonnie Hill case, of course, very, very famous back in 1961, back in the September there. Betty reported actually consistent poltergeist cases after the case of the abduction phenomenon, where she, of course, was going through hypnotic regression to bring those memories back. But yeah, for months afterwards, there was poltergeist activity too.
Yeah, she was also reported hearing strange beeping sounds as well. And another thing to mention on that is they both reported, Betty and Barney Hill, that after that encounter, and it's as understandable as it is, they had a constant sense of fear and fright and the sense that they would have to leave the house very quickly, so much so that they left the packed bag by the back door. So if they had to leave, they could be gone in an instant. And that was something that we spoke about right at the very beginning, this feeling of fear and anxiety and stress or whatever. So, I mean, the beeping's interesting because that's something that a lot of people who find out they've been abducted by aliens, or at least they find out that they suspect that, is they sometimes recall beeps at the end of the encounter, strange beeping sound, strange machinery. Who knows what that is? But yeah, I completely agree with you, Kristian.
You think that the beeps potentially are, I hate to use the phrase, like, is it the startup engines of where it's going to leave? Mm-hmm. Or do you think it's something like that is what sets the mindset? They are like the conditioner, and then when these things happen, that's the close down, you're back to normal now.
It could be. I mean, the beeping one's interesting, Mel, because this is one of those things where I spoke about my wife being more open to things now. October, November last year, I can't remember the date off the top of my head. We had a particularly rough time, not personally, but stuff going on around us. And that's that emotional thing there. But it was about 3 in the morning, which I know is witchy now. It was about 3:15, something like that. And we woke up with a beep, 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 just going on and on. And the first thought is it's a smoke alarm, but it wasn't that. And so I ventured downstairs. The dog wasn't reacting to this, which is strange because it normally would. And no matter where I went in the house, this beeping didn't get quieter, louder. It was just constant. And me and my wife could both hear this. We had no idea where it came. We still don't know. And then it just suddenly stopped. And then instead of like being all, oh, what was that? What was that? We had a bit second discussion. Then we just went straight back to sleep, as if nothing had happened. And we both woke up the next morning feeling that was a bit weird. When I was speaking to Karen Alexander, the crop circle researcher, she said she had a very similar thing, almost identical, in fact. That she was doing research in crop circles and she was looking at the consciousness side of it, actually. And she said in her house, she had a beeping sound. And she said that, it didn't get quieter, louder. It was just all around her. And again, the person who was in the house with her could also hear it, and then it just suddenly stopped. So I don't know what that beeping is. And I know what you mean about it could be UFOs and, the engine and off it goes. Maybe it is trying to project that image into your mind, but it's certainly something. And yeah, I've experienced that myself. And again, that was very real. I wish I'd been quick enough to record that and see whether actually anything came through. But
I had a similar problem here once, and it has a humorous ending. So in our corridor here, there's like a cupboard for the coats, and at the end of the cupboard used to be the boiler room, and in there they took all that out, and so what they've got a Omni boiler on the wall, combi boiler on the wall. And basically in there I've got a bookcase full of paranormal stuff and loads of other stuff in there. All the Christmas wrappings in there, and a big bag and a tub and all that kind of stuff. And I went in there, got a book once, and I came back in here. And then all of a sudden, I could hear this beep, 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 beep. And I, for days, could not find where this was coming from. I was looking and I couldn't find it. Well, what it was buried in one of the boxes was a personal attack alarm was at the bottom of one of these boxes on the inside. And basically, I guess it nudged the box enough that it was then pressing on the button that was inside the packaging, inside the box, inside 3 of these cases. And when I eventually picked this box up, it stopped for the first time in like 2 days. I was just like, and every so often I go in that cupboard and all of a sudden it would just go off again.
Well, who knows what that were, but yeah, I mean, like you say, I mean, I think there are more things that happen to people that connect this phenomena than people think. It's just highlighting, and you know, I'm not on my own doing this. I'm building on what other people have already highlighted. It's just you see different connections the more cases you look at. But yeah, interesting stuff.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have a question for Marcus?
I think I'd ask how he got into it. Like, how he discovered that he was curious about things like that. In terms of actual phenomena, like rather than just, oh yeah, I liked Loch Ness monsters and that kind of thing. Like scientifically, where does his head go with the crossover? Like, how did he get into exploring that?
Okay. This could quite literally be a book, because that's essentially what the crossover that I'm working on right now is about. So I'm going to give as detailed an answer as I can without going on for ages. How did I get involved in this? Right. Okay. I've always wanted to write. I've always had an interest in the paranormal. Okay. And those two things just essentially came together. When I first started this, I thought that I would just write lots of articles, which I've done, and compile books in a similar way that, say, Charles Fort did, just noting all this stuff and documenting it. As I was doing that, certainly before I started doing that on a freelance professional level, I don't want to turn this dark, but my wife was pregnant with what would have been our second child. She suffered an ectopic pregnancy. Obviously, we lost a baby, and the next few years were exceptionally difficult through various treatments. We were going back and forth to the hospital. Will we be able to do this? We couldn't in the end. And it was just a really hard time. Around that time, a little bit towards the end of it, say 2/3 through, and when I say the measurement, you get to a point where you kind of think, well, it's not going to happen now. And partly that kind of takes a weight off both of our shoulders, really. But as all this stuff was happening, I started seeing a little boy around the house. It was usually, to get in this office, you would go from the living room over there and you go, there's a small hall and there's the stairs that way. And I'd often see it as I was coming to this room, out the corner of my eye, I'd turn around, there's nothing there. It was always at the back of the house to begin with. So, you ignore it at first and you're just seeing things. So eventually I was saying to Tracy, I'm seeing a little boy. And, she was saying, well, it's probably just stress, it'll be nothing. I did a bit of research thinking, well, something happened in the house. Perhaps a little boy had an accident out the back window, something like that. Nothing like that. But it was always at the back. And usually, as I say, at the top of the stairs. This went on for years. It wasn't like this was every day or every week. It could have been, I'd see him one day and then maybe I won't see him again for 6 months. Maybe I might see him next week, on and off. Then I started seeing him downstairs near where my computer is, my other computer in the living room, at the back windows, again, at the back French doors, only for a fleeting second. My wife never saw him apart from one occasion. We were having dinner, we were watching television, having dinner in the living room, and all of a sudden, we both, for whatever reason, looked out the window. We have blinds, so we don't have to, we could just see. And there was a little boy there, and he waved, and then he was gone. And I can't say he disappeared. I can't say he ran off. He was just there 1 minute, and the next minute, he wasn't there. A similar thing happened. It was the only time I was actually frightened by this. Was I was writing, was on my own. It was relatively late. Tracy was at work, probably about 9 o'clock at night. And I turned around, and this little boy by the television waves at me and then disappeared. And that, it nerved me that much. I rang Tracy. I've just seen he's in the house. I've just seen him again. But that encounter aside, I wasn't scared by this. Around the same time, because I was then starting to think, well, this stuff could be really real. It was the first time I made me think, well, maybe there is more to this. So I was, researching more and more aspects of the paranormal. I started, dabbling, I guess, in astral projection, things like trying to. I certainly managed to, I was sat in the chair back there. It just took me hours and hours and hours. And, this was speaking with people who could do it. And I managed to, I think, leave my body slightly, go into the living room. I could see my wife, I could see my son. I could tell you what they were watching on TV. And then I was back in here in the chair. There was lots of stuff going on at the same time. But at this point now, I'm really intrigued. And I'm thinking, well, I have to look into this. And this was partly what took me away from the UFO aspect of it. However, shortly after that, I had what some people will say is sleep paralysis. It may have been, I don't know. But I woke up and there was this strange, I know it sounds silly saying this, but it's like a strange entity. I was laid on my bedroom floor and it was grabbing my foot. I was looking at it. I couldn't see its face, or should I say I couldn't see any details on its face, even though I was looking dead at it. And there was this, I wouldn't say a bad smell. It was more like burning, like a burning plasticky smell. And we smelled this quite a lot. I think I spoke to you, Caroline, about this for a while back. Yeah. And then, again, I just woke up on my bed. Everything was normal, but I've never been as frightened in my life after that experience. Now, whether that was an actual thing. So now I'm starting to think, well, why am I seeing, strange entities? And why am I seeing a little boy? And is this to do with me, like, researching UFOs and aliens? And the more I'm researching this, I'm reading people's accounts, and I think, well, that happened to me. I smelt that. So that's kind of why I started looking at the crossover of it. The reason I started looking at the emotional aspect to begin with, and this is really what kind of drives the research and the book, is, again, back in this chair, things had started to settle down at this point. I'd stopped messing around with astral projection because it unnerved me, I'll be honest, it did, although I'm still immensely interested in it. But me and Tracy had kind of moved on in terms of, okay, it's not going to happen, we're at peace with that. I was in my chair, I must have fallen asleep, and this wasn't a dream, I'll tell you that much. I kind of woke up and the little boy was stood right next to me. I was in my chair like that and he was stood right next to me and he was stroking my head. I couldn't feel his hand physically, but I could feel his hand going across my head. And he said, I'll never forget you. He said, it's all going to be okay now. It's all going to be okay now. And disappeared. And I've not seen him since. So I started coming away from that thinking, well, the natural thing is that the spirit of our unborn child? I don't think it was. Is it just a spirit guide that had to see me through this kind of thing? Or is it something that I started to think a little later on? Is it a trickster? Has it put me on a path that it wanted me to be on? I don't really know what those things are. I suspect it would be some kind of spirit guide. But it was essentially that. That is what dragged me towards thinking all these things are connected. All the emotions that I was feeling, the waking up while this was happening on the settee, sometimes feeling absolutely terrified for no reason. And like literally, and I mean sprinting up the stairs like a little child, and getting into the bedroom and just not even knowing why I was scared, what I was scared of, but I was. And I know as a caveat that this could be a mental reaction to a very hard situation. I accept that. I don't think it is that. Really, I don't. And I think about this a lot. So, yeah, I think those events really encouraged me to delve into this stuff deeper and read as much as I could about people's encounters, speak to as many people as I could. I mean, I have my own podcast, and that's great for entertainment, and it's great for the viewers, but a lot of that is me taking in as much as I can from other people and what they've experienced. And, it'll happen probably once an episode. Someone will say something, I'll be like, bing, that's happened to me, and I want to speak to them about that. Interviewing Anthony Peake, it was just, they were just going off all the time. And I was speaking to him because I was thinking he's at where I hope I get to with my research. I suppose if he's correct, then you can't not get there. So yeah, I know that's a little condensed, but that's why I started looking at crossovers between phenomena, because it just kind of showed itself to me, and the emotional aspects of it that I suspected when things happened. Normally for me was when I felt either low or possibly angry or any emotion really. But I'll be honest, it does seem to be negative with me. It's not like I feel happy and things happen. Maybe they do, I don't pick up on them, I don't know. But certainly when I feel, negative, stuff seems to happen slightly around. So I don't know. So that's the condensed answer. The bigger answer will be in the book. I hate to be that guy. But I mean, I'm still really researching this, and we're only at me personally, I'm only in the speculation and the theories stage. After this bit's done, and I've got a few people in mind, I want to really progress this into actually trying to look at the science on this. And I don't know really how we would do that, but I suspect measuring and monitoring brain activity when things are happening, and that's difficult because things happen sometimes and you're not ready for it. But yeah, that's why I think there's a crossover. I just saw so many details in other people's accounts and other cases that had shown up in mine, and also saw details because I'm just an avid reader of anything to do with this stuff, and I just constantly seeing things where I've seen that in that case, and I've seen that in that case, and I just feel that ultimately what we're dealing with is something of the subconscious mind that relies on emotion, and I think it happens to all of us, but most people, not most people, but a lot of people dismiss it and just get on with their lives, and if that works for them, that's great, but I've just got a mind that I want to know, and not at all costs. Sometimes you do. When we talked about music, for example, you need to bring yourself back to reality. I feel I spoke to a girl once who she genuinely believes she was abducted by aliens, and she was telling me about this. And I'm paraphrasing her, but she said something like, "How do you go back to eating burgers and watching sports after that?" And at the time, I completely agreed with her, and I still agree with her to a point. But I kind of feel you have to. And not just in the paranormal, in life in general, you have to do that. Otherwise, you probably drive yourself mad. You at the end of the day, it's interesting what lies beyond, what's all this about, but we've got a life to live as well. And you can't let yourself be blinded, I guess, and overwhelmed by that. So, yeah, I hope that answered the question. Sorry for going off on one a bit there, but yeah, that's what drives me in this, why I want to know what's going on.
Fantastic. I'm sure Liz will be very happy with your answer there. So when she gets to watch this back, I'm sure she'll be one of the people who's like, "Oh, that's great."
Well, I hope she is. Right, actually. Okay. I suppose just as a general question, then, do we feel that we're going to get to a point where science and non-academics, and I hate that phrase, but we all know what we mean when we say that, where we're going to come to a middle ground, basically, because I feel it's so important. I generally feel that we're not just talking about ghosts and spooks and, things that go bump in the night. I really genuinely believe that researching this stuff is researching humanity, the human psyche, collectively and individually, the reality, consciousness, our place in the universe. So do we feel we'll get to a point where we'll see science approach non-academics in a serious frame of mind to try and literally dig down and get to the bottom of this stuff? And I suppose if we do, what will that tell us? Where will that leave us? It might not be a good thing. It might, it might be better not knowing. I don't believe that, but maybe we are.
Could be in some kind of Indian zoo,
Yeah, yes, prison planet, all that. Yeah, who knows? But
absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. That's awesome. To have a question carrying on for season 2 then. So I guess, Martin, where would you want to put the phenomena then? What would satisfy your curiosity to what you think the phenomena might be?
Well, no, a lot of what we're saying sort of resonates with me. The subconscious part of the brain we don't really know an awful lot about. The cerebellum, for example, contains 80% of our neurons. They're different. They're granular, like a bag of sugar, but it's 80% of our total brain cells in the cerebellum. And so what else can the cerebellum do? You know, if there are things happening below the level of consciousness, we don't know. We're just seeing the results of it, aren't we?
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
We're seeing the results of it, and then we're thinking, what the hell was that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the fact there are so many out-of-body experience situations, astral projection, near-death, the fact that you can see connections in all this other phenomena. And a good example of the consciousness and emotion would be cryptid encounters where, you know, you take them with a pinch of salt, I get that, but, you know, a cryptid will be chasing somebody, they might trip over, they're cornered, but the cryptid never attacks. It's almost like it wants the fear. Once you're scared, then it just disappears. So yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot to do with the subconscious, and I just think it'll tell us so much more about that and about human reality and what we are, why we're here. All those big questions can probably be gotten to, or certainly have a light shone on them by looking at stuff like this.
About your journey this season, where do you think we have gone? How have you enjoyed it so far?
We've been all over the place, haven't we? Blimey. Well, what can I say?
I've tried to give us a variation of topics. I've tried to go down, you know, history versus ghost versus folklore, the dark side of the paranormal. And I think we've ended, for a reason, synchronicities that we had to cancel twice, but I think we've ended on the perfect episode with Marcus talking about crossovers, and I actually think it happened for a reason, that we had to change our appointments on a couple of occasions, because I don't think anything else would have sat well being on the end of season 1. So for me, I've loved every minute of this journey. I think each of us have grown within the team. Our confidence and how we develop, you know, the questions for the people, our guests have improved. So I'm hoping that on season 2 we're going to hit the ground running.